So again, welcome to this evening's chat. My name is Yubi Aranda Sandoval. I am an assistant director here in the Office of Alumni Engagement and 2017 UNCG Alumni. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our guest speaker, Dr. Stephanie Irby Coard. Dr. Coard is a clinical trained psychologist, researcher, tenured associate professor in the Department of Human Development and Family Studies. Dr. Coard's research examines racial development and implementation of cultural relevant evidence-based practices targeting African American families and community. Her clinical training and understanding of cultural factors as they relate to etiology, treatment, prevention, and child mental health problems has informed her work on a number of locally and federally funded studies to pursue research in the development and culturally relevant strategies to assist African American parents to prevent and manage common behavior problems among youth. This research has resulted in the development of an observational measure of racial socialization in parenting curriculum and written materials. In tonight's presentation, Dr. Coard will speak on how parents can have conversations about race-related issues to help their children construct a strong foundation and thrive. Welcome, Dr. Coard. It's a pleasure to have you this evening.
Thank you. Thanks so much. You can hear me okay?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I am pleased to be here. As UB stated, I'm in the Department of Human Development and Family Studies, and I really focus on the psychological implications of race, ethnicity, and culture, and the development of culturally relevant interventions for diverse families and communities. So I'm really pleased to be here today, and my hope is that you all will have lots of questions. I'm gonna save some time at the end for any questions that you have, and also to give you some tidbits about what's coming down the pike as far as the intervention I'm going to share with you today. So I will go ahead and share my screen here. Actually, let me first put it in. Put it in right there. Yeah, that's better. Okay. That should be better. There we go. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about supporting parents and having courageous conversations, and I'm going to be talking about the One Talk at a Time video series, which is an online video series that myself and my esteemed colleagues have developed. Dr. Gabby Stein, who's in the Department of Psychology here at UNCG. Dr. Lisa King, she's actually our colleague in psychology at Wake Forest University. And Dr. Laura Gonzalez is also here at UNCG in the education. So the four of us came together with our respective expertise, East Asian families, Latinx families for Dr. Gonzalez and Dr. Stein, and myself with Black families. And we came together because we were really interested in trying to understand what are the unique experiences of these various groups and youth in particular as they're being parented around racial, ethnic issues, but then also what are the common threads. So, you know, we live in a racially conscious society, which is, I'm sure, not a surprise. And with that, we have racism, okay? It has a profound impact on children's health and mental health. The Academy of Pediatrics came out with a statement in January of 2019 that basically showed a direct link to racism and children's health outcomes. So not indirect, but direct link. So we've got lots of research that shows the impact of racism and discrimination, both on youth and families. American Psychiatric Association, American Psychological Association, National Alliance on Mental Illness, for which I'm on the board of, has also come out with their statement. National Institute of Health, the National Institute of Mental Health. So, I mean, it's a public health issue. It's a significant issue. And it's something that more and more we are looking toward how to support families and support parents in raising their children when they live in a racially conscious society. And so one way in which we do that is the work that we and others, myself, and my colleagues and others across the country are doing on what we call racial ethnic socialization. And basically, racial ethnic socialization is basically the process by which we teach our children who they are as ethnic racial beings. And so there's really two components or two, I guess, main foci. The first is to teach them about who they are in terms of their cultural pride, in terms of their history, in terms of, you know, who they are and where they come from, and to be proud of that history, right? But the second part is teaching them problem-solving skills and teaching them to be flexible and fluid as they attempt to approach their environments, given that race-related situations will arise. And so the whole idea is that we want children to be able to navigate and negotiate the terrain of racism. And in order to do that, they need to be flexible and they need to be fluid in terms of those social interactions, and without losing a core sense of self, which is key. So again, it's what we call emphasizing cultural pride messages, whatever that culture and that ethnic heritage is. And then we balance that with what we call preparation for bias or preparation for racism messages. So some other areas of racial ethnic socialization, I talked about the importance of race and ethnicity, of course, is a message that we give. Racial ethnic pride and teaching history and culture, which I mentioned, preparing youth for racism and racial ethnic discrimination. But then there's also other aspects too. There's focus on common humanity, treating everyone with respect, of course. So what we call egalitarian messages that many of us teach, you know, peaceful coexistence, you know, treat others the way you would want to be treated, right? But also, some parents take the stance of avoiding the subject of race and ethnicity, and that is not recommended. It's my belief that all families racially socialize their child. Doesn't matter your race, your ethnicity, your culture. All families racially, ethnically, culturally socialize their children. By not doing it, you're doing it. And so, so the idea is that racial ethnic socialization is a tool by which you should socialize and give your child meaning and a repertoire of tools that they can use to navigate their environments. But by avoiding the subject altogether gives a very different message. So balance is important. You want to balance the racial, ethnic, cultural pride messages, the history and all that good stuff, along with treating with respect. And you also want to include the fact that there is racism and how to recognize racism, preparation for discrimination, and then coping with inequality. And now let me just say that there are ways of doing these things in a way that's developmentally appropriate. And so while many of you may have some, you know, younger children, your thought is, well, how do I teach my younger child to recognize racism? one of the things that we talk about in One Talk at a Time is the importance of it being developmentally appropriate. So there are ways to teach all these aspects in ways that are developmentally appropriate. The problem is that oftentimes the situations and the interactions and the race-related discrimination that they may be experiencing are not developmentally appropriate themselves. So you have young children who are targets of racism on the playground as early as 3 years old. So the catch is how do you racially, ethnically socialize your child in a way that's developmentally appropriate, but is also preparing them for things that are not developmentally appropriate. That's really quite a task. We know through our research in developing One Talk at a Time that there are a number of barriers that parents have to engaging in racial ethnic socialization. They don't know where to start or what to say. It's like it's one of those conversations. It's like, wow, like, what do I do? Anytime having those hard conversations, whether it's sex, drugs, race, it's just, they're difficult conversations. It's too hard to talk about. It will upset the child. So some parents feel like if I talk about it, then it's going to bring it into existence. The belief that the child is too young to talk about racism and discrimination. And I also would beg to differ with that because, again, younger and younger ages, children are experiencing racism and discrimination. And it's really important for parents to get ahead of that. To help to buffer those sorts of experiences. Don't want children to think everyone is bad. Of course not, you don't. And so that's really important. Don't want to make race a big deal. It might be better to blend in and get along, and it's hard to find the time. And so these are some of the things that parents are really struggling with, and we get it. And parents are struggling with this across the racial ethnic groups that I mentioned earlier. And these are real concerns. The other is, let me back up. Okay, so in developing One Talk at a Time, we thought about some of the barriers that parents were talking about. And we developed a strategy, sort of a format, a strategy, a plan for how parents can begin to engage in this conversation. And we named that Ready, Set, Talk. So Ready is basically where we tell parents, okay, it's time to take a deep breath. It's time to kind of get centered and to think about what it is that you're feeling around having these conversations. It's sort of your prep step, right? It's that time where you start doing a little bit of self-talk to yourself about, okay, I need to have this conversation. What is it that, is important to me to communicate? What are the barriers from that previous slide? What are some of those barriers that I'm experiencing myself that I'm, and really struggling with? So really just coming to terms with, okay, where am I in this moment? And as I'm trying to have this conversation or beginning to have this conversation. One of the things that's really important though, in this Ready Step is this Ready Step also assumes that you have a positive relationship, communication style with your child. So, this Ready Step is something that would build on a already positive, interactive parent-child relationship, okay? But it really does start as you just getting centered and really thinking about, okay, where am I with this? And let me get my plan in order. And then we move to set. And we teach parents about, okay, now that you're ready, you've taken a deep breath, maybe said a prayer, listen to some music, got yourself ready. It's time to really think about, okay, now what is the context by which I need to do this? And there are a number of things you need to take into consideration. the time, the place. I mean, think about, sometimes you just can't have conversations in certain areas and locations and spaces and places. I mean, you need to make sure that it's a place that's going to be conducive to that talk. So setting the time and the place. Also thinking about things like your child's age, your child's temperament, their style. So, again, you know your child best. So think about what is the best time. Is this a child where you feel like it's best to say, you know what, let's go out and get something to eat and talk and just have some, parent, child time, right? Or is it a time where you got to just catch them when they're moving and maybe taking advantage of sort of those natural interactions, like, driving, from one place to another and using that car time, travel time as a way to have the talk, or, during a natural, routine of the household or something. But it's important to really think about the situation and the context in which you want to have this conversation. Is this a situation that has happened at school? Is it something that's happened at home, in the community? So really be able to just think about what the conversation is. And let me just also say that one talk at a time is not just about a talk. So as I'm talking about these steps, these are steps to have multiple conversations. So it's not just one talk. You don't have to get it right the first time. You may not get hardly out the gate the first time. But it's something that you will build on over time, and you will have many, many, many conversations, and they will become more and more natural. So the last step is talk. It's talk. You can do it when the kids bring it up. You can also, when you're, having this talk, you can, seek out more information. You want to make sure that you ask open-ended questions when you're having these talks. Also making sure that you are checking in terms of your child's feelings, thoughts, reactions, show lots of empathy, and also sometimes help them see another side. Okay, so it's really important to also make sure that you're clear about what the child is thinking, as opposed to you assuming what that child is thinking. So really checking in both from a, emotional standpoint, but also from a cognitive standpoint. That meaning making is key. And then provide some coping skills and helping them to problem solve. And again, developmentally appropriate, and our video series and our online frequently asked questions and resource sheets and things give you ideas for to make this developmentally appropriate as well, what that would look like for certain ages of children. So we can't control racism and discrimination around us, right? But we can control how we prepare our kids and how they view themselves in the context of such. And so really, again, one talk at a time is multiple conversations. It's a tool that says, okay, we know this is difficult. Here are some steps, here are some strategies to help you along the way. We want to inspire parents. We want them to think about it as something they can do proactively, directly, transparently, and be very concrete and non-judgmental about it. So this is just a slide that shares some of the families that we worked with who were involved in developing this video series. And I'm going to share a little bit with you now.
Stephanie, I'm not sure that we're able to hear the audio.
Oh, okay. You know what?
What's that?
I think that happened to me before. Let me do this.
And to find their voice.
That seizure.
Yes.
Are you good now?
Unfortunately, we live in a society
Perfect.
that sees your race or ethnicity first before they get to know you.
Por ejemplo, yo voy manejando, un policía me puede parar solo por mi color, por ser latino. Eso es lo que para mí significa ser latino en este país, miedo.
When you're younger, you really want to fit in. I know when I was a child, even around my daughter's age, I think there were times when I didn't want my friends to come over to my house because I just thought it was just too different.
It's really about preparing them to be independent people, independent thinkers, and to find their voice, which is going to be different from mine and from their mothers, but to not be afraid of that.
I don't feel like I had a lot of conversations with my parents about race and ethnicity until I was much older. I'm motivated because I don't feel like I had enough conversations like that when I was his age or growing up.
Una Plática a la Vez es un programa que hemos desarrollado para fomentar las conversaciones difíciles y a veces valientes que uno tiene que tener con sus hijos.
We hope to empower parents to have these courageous conversations.
By avoiding it and not talking about it, you're talking about it whether you think it or not. It's okay. We all struggle with this, and here's some tools to help you to get through it, and we'll do it together.
So as I mentioned, One Talk at a Time also comes along with various resource sheets. We have tip sheets, we have resource sheets, and sheets that help you kind of think about how to craft these messages based on your child's developmental level, give you examples of ways in which you can do it. Across those different types of messages that we are encouraging you to use. We talk about how to do it reactively when you're responding to your child, how to do it proactively when there really hasn't been any specific catalyst for the conversation. So we provide these online services as well. So let me just say that all of this is free. It is online. And in terms of next steps, one of the things that we've got a lot of positive feedback about One Talk at a Time. And one of the things that came out of this is a lot of parents, white families, approaching us saying, well, what about white families? Is there something that could be done for us? And so one of the things that we thought about is, that really makes perfect sense because what we want to do is really make this a conversation that all families are having in a very sort of intentional way. So we have started developing One Talk at a Time video for white families, how to teach your children to be white allies, how to teach your children to be anti-racist, and to be part of the solution. It's important for white families to teach their children about privilege and what that means and how you can use that for good, and to bring about equality and equity for all. And so we also know that parents are struggling with how to teach their children how to use their voice to advocate for other people. And so we wanted to use that series or that particular video also to teach about how they can be advocates for others. So I would, love to engage in any questions, conversation that you all have. And so that officially ends my presentation. So let's talk.
There is a comment in the chat box, and it says, I have a serious concern about my 15-year-old Black son with autism. In today's climate, I believe, I'm afraid to give him, to have him go anywhere due to fear of people that they act first and ask questions later in regards to his autism.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I mean, I think that the issue of difference is a very serious issue. And so while I'm talking about race and ethnicity and culture, you bring up the point that there are other differences, visible differences sometimes that that really make children the target of others. And so, you know, without knowing a whole lot about what types of conversations you can have with your son, I mean, I know as a psychologist that autism is across a spectrum in terms of ability and understanding and so forth, and communication style. So without knowing all that, I think it would still be, I think it's always important whenever you have a child that is dealing with some sort of difference, that you make sure that you empower that child and make sure that that child is has a sense of comfort and pride in who they are, regardless of what that is, to accept their difference and to normalize that difference for them, but also to try to have discussions around what happens when you have interactions with other people that are very negative and you don't have control over the things that they're trying to either tease you about or make fun of or put you down for. And that's, you know, that's a big charge. I get it. And autism in particular may be challenging because, again, I don't know how communicative your child is. But I still think that anytime you're dealing with an issue of difference, I think the Ready, Set, Talk tools and strategies can be tweaked to really give you some, at least, starting points.
I do want to say that I have put in the link to One Talk at a Time for you guys to, you know, have access to these resources that Dr. Coard mentioned. It's in the chat box, but please type in any questions that you may have in this chat box or in the Q&A box and for Dr. Coard. So what is a good age to start these conversations? Like, is it 1? Is it 5? Yeah.
Okay, I believe actually that racial ethnic socialization is something that starts even before a child is born. And, you know, I'll be honest, I mean, I think that given the connections that we know and the relationships between discrimination, racism, and stress on mothers and stress on unborn children, I would say that it's important to really prepare oneself when you are even carrying the child, because that stress, race-related stress, race-related trauma, those things impact the unborn child, just like any other stress would. And so I think that that's really important. I would say there are things you can do early on. I mean, honestly, from the very beginning. I mean, if you think about socialization in general, right? Forget the race, ethnicity, and culture. If you just think about socialization in general, you're socializing a child as soon as they come out of your womb, correct? I mean, you're socializing them in terms of the environment that you provide for the child, in terms of the toys, in terms of the songs you sing, in terms of the books you read. I mean, so there are ways in which you can infuse your culture and your history and be very intentional about that. And so those are those sort of cultural pride messages. But then as the child begins to interact with other children and begins to notice difference, and we know that children begin noticing difference at age 3, okay? So it's not racism. They don't know what race means from, as an adult, but they know it's chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, or whatever flavors, we are naturally, our tendency is to categorize because we want things to fit. We want things to be put in certain boxes. And children are very concrete in that way. They want things to fit. That's why a child who may see 2 white parents who adopted a Black child, well, that doesn't fit, mommy. It doesn't fit. So, they're not trying to be negative at all. They're just trying to make sense of their world. And so I would say beginning early on when they are able to notice difference, in which we teach children at a very young age about feeling, what does it feel like to be on the inside group versus the outside group? I oftentimes will use M&Ms. I will use jelly beans or what are little bears? Gummy bears.
Gummy bears.
Gummy bears, what are your favorite colors? Okay, these are your favorite colors. These taste good. Well, what about the yellow? What do you think? How do you think the yellow feels that that the bear's not part of your group of yummy bears? There are just ways in which you can use those types of candies and preferences to give lessons about being inside or outside. So even though you may not like the taste of that gummy bear, right? That doesn't make gummy bear a bad bear. Somebody else will like the taste of that gummy bear, and he's still a bear, right? He needs to be treated like a bear. So, there are ways to really have these conversations at a very early age. So I would say early. I would say beginning at 3 to have those conversations.
Thank you. I never really thought about candy and using it in this creative way to teach them a lesson. It's a great idea.
Absolutely. I'd be curious to know if anybody in the group, one way or another, has either had these conversations or has been struggling with these conversations or even thinking about having these conversations. Particularly in light of all that's been going on, there's just been a lot of stress that the country's been under. And so I just wonder where those who are participating, where you all are in these discussions, if at all.
And while we have Kraylin Bradley said, maybe approaching it with the candy might help my son with autism.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as people, I realize that maybe this conversation is better next time with a dialogue and having a way to interact with each other, since there are few of us. So I think next time we will have a more interactive, and next time being on the 19th of October, when we will have our conversation. So,
so I'll be here with Dr. Laura Gonzalez, and she'll be able to share more information about the videos for white families that we've been developing. So that's in the movement right now. We're developing those as we speak. So we'll have a part 2.
We have a couple that came in. It says, yes, this has been an ongoing conversation with my 11-year-old son, especially as he is online more and seeing the news.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons, a main reason why parents have got to get ahead of it, or at least be in the game, because children are seeing it played out in the news. They're seeing it played out online. And we see particularly lots of online use with preteens that tell us that they're even being more influenced than older teens using these online platforms and apps. So, you know, it's being played out there. So it would be really important to engage the child in a discussion about what they're saying and what are they reading, what are they seeing on these videos, or what the messages that are being said, what are they saying, and also, you know, do they see? We also see that oftentimes children use online platforms to advocate and to advocate online. So when they see something that's going on that's not great, they'll say something online that they may not be comfortable saying in person. So we're seeing both. We're seeing the use of, you know, the acting out racism and discrimination online, but we're also seeing kids stepping up and saying, no, stop, that's not right. But it would be really important to ask him what he's seeing and what meaning he's giving. And a lot of times the media and the images that we want to avoid are actually some of the best tools to help have those conversations. What you don't want is your child to make their own meaning of the conversation or to take the meaning of the peers and friends as the sole interpretation, right? So you know, it's important to be in the game and not on the sideline when it comes to this stuff.
Yes, news, social media can play a huge impact on lives and how we are dealing with some of the messages coming through. It says, my son is mostly seeing YouTube videos and watching things for entertaining that are supposed to be comic, but he doesn't understand the context behind it. Recent case in point was him watching videos of Karens and thinking it was funny.
Watching
videos of quote unquote Karens, the ladies who call the police.
And thinking it was funny. Okay, yeah. So I would use that opportunity to school him on other ways of interpreting that. But see, it's important for you to know that he's thinking it's funny, knowing that, because I'm sure his friends are thinking it's funny. So of course they think it's funny. I think it's funny. I'm not, you know, go out on a limb and get serious, right? Mm-hmm. But it gives you the entree to have a conversation, you know. Oh, so you think it's funny? Well, tell me what you think is funny about it. What are your friends saying is funny about it? And sharing your own interpretation. You know, there's another way we could look at this. You know, how would you like it if blah, blah, blah? You know, make it, you know, sort of give him a scenario where he's the one that's the target of that. Or another person is that he may know is a target of that. But to make it real for him. But I think that gives a perfect entree into shifting that narrative, because that's the whole idea behind being flexible and fluid, to be able to have different ways of interpreting so that you're not, oh my gosh, that's racism. Oh my gosh, it's not. It's like, okay, their child is able to kind of think through various scenarios and be able to think about, okay, what is making me uncomfortable? Is this something I feel I need to respond to? What are the ways in which my mom or dad or my caregiver told me, what are my options? You want them to have options. You don't want them to be reactive, because that usually is not good to react. You want to be able for them to have a repertoire of tools, strategies. Okay, this is what we were talking about that day when we were watching X, Y, and Z. And we were talking about different scenarios and different, you know, we were role-playing different things. Okay, I think I'm going to respond this way. I think I'm going to do this. You know, I mean, you want them to have options. You want them to have options.
There is a question here or a comment in the Q&A. I've had these conversations with my 13-year-old son. I have more challenges discussing it with my 7-year-old son. They both have friends of all races, and it's harder for the 7-year-old to understand why people don't like him just because of the skin, of his color of his skin.
Yeah. Yeah, it is hard for them to understand that because it's not right? But I think it's important for you to, again, you always want to give sort of the positive messages first, and you always want to give them balanced with the negative. Okay, so, I think it's really important for you early on to really empower him and give him messages that are very uplifting and affirming. But you can also then follow that up with the idea that unfortunately we live in a society where everybody's just not nice all the time. It's not that everybody's bad, but sometimes people are just not nice sometimes. And sometimes they're not nice about things that you have absolutely no control over. And so, we want you to treat people kind, and we hope that people will treat you kind. But understand that if they don't treat you kind because of, your skin color, your accent, whatever those things are that you have no control over, that's their problem. That's their issue. That is in no way a reflection on you. So you understand the importance of making sure that the child is feeling good about themselves. And those are things that you can do from Jump Street, from the very beginning, to build confidence in children so that when you then start having these messages that will counter and try to chip away at that, they're like, well, wait a minute, no, I'm not going to feel that way because I feel this way because my mother told me X, Y, and Z. I had a young girl, she was 6, and they were having a little school play, and they were talking about Annie. And they told, one of the little girls said, well, you could never be an Annie because Annie's white. And she said, well, I can be anything I want to be because my mother told me I can be anything I want to be because I'm smart and I'm kind. And it was clear that her parents had armored her with a sense of confidence, even at that very young age, so that when somebody says something and tries to chip away at it, it's not so easy to do. And as a matter of fact, it's very healthy to even have conversations with your kids about comebacks. What are some of the responses that you can say to them? Why is your skin so dirty? Well, my skin is not dirty. My skin is brown because my parents are brown, or God made me this way, or, there are ways that you can have your child respond so that they're not, I don't know what to say. Maybe I am dirty. I don't know. You want to armor them. You want to give them the verbiage. You want to give them the skills. But first and foremost, you want to build that sense of confidence. These are going to be much more difficult conversations to have if your child doesn't have a sense of confidence. So.
There's a comment in the chat box, and then there's a question in the Q&A. Last comment was, we are Black America, so I quickly explain how these are real world situations that can greatly impact our people. I try to balance not scaring him, but also not allowing him to laugh it off as pure entertainment.
Yeah. That balance is really key. because we know from research, if you give more of one without the other, you don't have the same positive outcome. Okay, so you don't want all the negative messages because that can lead to a sense of anxiety and fear. And you don't want just the positive messages because, quite frankly, that will only get you but so far. And so that balance is very difficult. I get it. But the fact that you are trying to do both of those messages, that you understand the importance of that, and you recognize that you don't want to scare him, and letting him know, look, I don't want to scare you. I just want to be able to prepare you because, quite frankly, some of the images, the things that we're seeing happening in the real world are scary. Okay? These kids are seeing it played out in the media. And it's not just something that they can say, oh, that's them, because oftentimes they may look like that child or a relative. So it's not so easy to just brush it off. So it's going to be really important to be very concrete and direct about the realities that exist, because they do. And you don't want your child to be, you know, navigating spaces and places in that idea that somehow, you know, his color is invisible, because it's not. And it has meaning that has nothing to do with him. You know, I always tell, you know, when I teach in my classes, you know, and they ask, well, Dr. Coard, what's the big thing about race? What race? You know, why are we always talking about race? And I have to explain to them that race is something that means absolutely nothing, but it also means everything. It means nothing because it means nothing about who you are. It's a social category that puts you in a presumed classification based on skin color, phenotype, facial feature, period. It doesn't tell anything about who you are as a person, what your values are, what your belief systems are, what your heritage is, your upbringing, nothing. It's just color. But if you add race to any other characteristic, be it economic, be it sexual orientation, be it, you know, gender, add race, it changes your positionality. You can have two poor people, both poor with 2 dimes in their pockets. Make one black, make one white. Okay? There is race, again, it means nothing, but it has been used in this country to marginalize and oppress. And so that is not something that can be ignored. But it's also something that children need to know you can't control. So you have no choice but learn how to navigate your environments, because we know how it impacts the mental health of us as adults and your children. And it's important also for white families and white children as well, because this dialogue is something that needs to be happening within families, but also across families, across peers, across children, friendships. These are conversations that need to be happening across groups. We can talk about it in silos, but the reality is we have to interact, right? And so why shouldn't we all talk about it? Because there are negative and positive consequences to racism for all groups, including white youth. So while their positionality might be different, again, not based on anything but skin color and being born that skin color, But it's important for them to understand what privilege is and what it isn't, and how to use privilege to, to facilitate equality and equity across. And it's also important for people within marginalized groups to know that there's privilege even within those groups. Okay, so, you may be a Black boy, but if your family has lots of resources and lots of money, that gives you a certain privilege within your race, right? So that privilege and that privilege conversation is something that should be happening within and across groups as well.
Thank you, Dr. Coard. Here's the next question. Is it ever an age that is too late to start or have these conversations?
I don't think it's ever too late to have the conversation, but it will be too late in you thinking that somehow the child hasn't experienced it, if that makes sense. I mean, you could say, okay, I'm going to wait until the child is 18 and we'll have this conversation. Well, I would always encourage you to have the conversation, but don't think that he hasn't or she hasn't been experiencing things throughout the years. So it's too late in terms of you bringing something new to the table, but it's not too late to always have conversations with your child. Again, these are multiple conversations. As they develop, as they mature, as they start moving in different places and spaces and having different types of experiences, the conversations will change. Okay, the conversations will become much more sophisticated, much more nuanced, and that's to be expected as one ages, right? Early on, it's just pretty basic. But, the conversations need to happen many times and in different ways. But no, it's never too late to talk about it, but that doesn't mean they haven't experienced it.
Thank you, Dr. Coard. Going back to privilege within our own ethnic group, how do I, as a parent, how do I begin to acknowledge that I have these privileges with my child? And how do I know what some of these privileges are?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think racial ethnic socialization requires that ready step to be something that parents really kind of sit and reflect on. How were they socialized? If they were, what were they told about who they are, and what did that mean for them? And what are things that they want to carry on, and what are the things that they want to change? I think it's going to be really important to reflect on that and to reflect on where you are in terms of race, in terms of how you are dealing with these issues, and to be really real about that, and to reflect on what are things or experiences that you have had that have been good, bad, and indifferent around it. In terms of how to acknowledge privilege, I think it's really something that it comes from understanding your experiences over time and understanding where you stand as opposed to where others around you stand. And so even within your own families, I mean, we know that there are within group differences that are oftentimes even more pronounced than between group differences. So it's really important for you to think about what things, maybe experiences you've been afforded. What are things that may be more difficult for others as opposed to you? What do you have experience with? What do you not? I mean, if you are someone who has had experience, doing lots of different activities and sports and the arts, and, you have all this exposure to different types of things, that's privilege, because exposure and experience is a privilege, because you have to pay. You need resources in order to participate in those types of things. So I would probably say everybody has privileges. It's just a matter of to what extent you have them. If you are healthy and able-bodied, that's a privilege, because there are people who are not. If you have a home and you are able to stay in your warm or you're cool in the heat, I mean, that's a privilege. So I think it's important to have conversations with your child about things that they have that other people may not have. And those conversations can start with just basic toys and books, and teaching basic characteristics around, gratefulness and, gratitude, and, understanding that everybody does not have the same, and some people have to go without, and just taking stock on where you fall in that, in that continuum.
Thank you, Dr. Coard. So this sums up our night. I've enjoyed this conversation. This has helped me begin to prepare for these conversations with my little one. Thank you for sharing these resources and your knowledge, your expertise. I appreciate that, and I'm sure that I can probably speak to many of our guests here tonight. If you have any questions, you are welcome to reach out to our office and in the alumni.uncg.edu. You are welcome to reach us through there. And Dr. Coard, would you like to provide an email?
Yes. Oh, it was on that last slide, but I can tell you the email, or I can ask. Sure. Put it in the chat, or?
Yes, go ahead and put it in the chat. Our guests can have access to that. Again, if you're unable to copy or paste it, please reach out to us through our website, UNCG Alumni, and we can provide that information to you as well. If you need to contact me, you can also contact me, and I'll put my email below and my LinkedIn page as well. Thank you. Let's see. There you go. Just one more announcement. I would like to extend the invitation for homecoming. Again, Dr. Coard will be we'll have Dr. Gonzalez, Laura Gonzalez as well, join us to talk about these the same conversation, but how our white families can teach their children about how to be an ally for our Black and Brown communities. And that Lunch and Learn will be October 19th at noon. And you can visit our website to alumni.uncg.edu for more information about all the other events going on that week. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. Buenas noches.
Take care.
Dr. Coard.